All right, so get this. We're going to try to unpack this paper you sent over about evaluating treatment effect models. And honestly, at first glance, I thought my brain was going to melt. But then you said it's like essential reading for anyone who really wants to know if those big scientific breakthroughs are actually legit.
Yeah, that's the gist of it. It gets into how we actually determine if a treatment could be anything, a new drug, some kind of therapy, even a social program, really does what we hope it's going to do.
Okay, so we're talking more than just like, does this new miracle drug work on average?
Uh-huh.
We're going way deeper.
Exactly. The paper zeroes in on this thing called the conditional average treatment effect, CATE for short. So think about it this way. You want to predict how well a new drug is going to work, but not just for the average Joe, for you specifically. And that's where CATE comes in. It's like, how do your genes, your lifestyle, even other medications you're taking, how do those things affect how well that treatment will work for you?
Whoa, that's wild. Personalized medicine, but like on steroids. So, what tipped these researchers off that something might be a little off with how we've been evaluating these CAPE models?
Well, a lot of this research uses, simulated data. Think of it like a science experiment, but in the digital world where they have total control. And what they found is that sometimes the way we're evaluating things in this digital world doesn't exactly translate to how well things work in the real world.
Right. It's like assuming that because someone's amazing at a racing video game,
Yeah.
they're automatically going to dominate on a real racetrack.
That's a great analogy. And, one of the big issues they point out is this tendency to just focus on the average performance of a model and not pay enough attention to whether the differences are, statistically significant.
Okay, hold on. Got to pump the brakes for a sec. What does that mean exactly? It's like saying my favorite basketball team is a shoe-in to win it all this year because they had that one amazing game where they crushed it.
And it's not just about one game, right? It's like comparing two different fertilizers based on, say, how much corn they help grow without actually checking if that difference in yield is because one fertilizer is truly better or just random chance. Maybe one field just had better soil, right?
Uh-huh. So we're talking about mistaking a lucky streak for the real deal. What's the solution here?
Well, the authors, they actually propose using an algorithm one that basically figures out the right statistical tests we should be using based on the data we're looking at. It's kind of like having this built-in BS detector.
Love it. So instead of
Right.
just eyeballing it or going with our gut, we've got this system that's like, hold on, let's make sure we're not getting ahead of ourselves.
Right. And it's about bringing like an extra layer of, scientific rigor to the table,
Yeah.
making sure we're not declaring a winner based on just one good free throw.
Right. Got to look at the whole game. And that makes me think about something else, variability. How
Mm.
consistent are these models?
Variability. Yeah, it's a big one. Like just saying a model is 80% accurate doesn't tell us the whole story, does it?
So what else do we need to be paying attention to?
Think about it this way. If someone tells you a stock has a 10% average return, does that mean it's always smooth sailing?
Definitely not.
Yeah.
My 401k has taught me a thing or two about peaks and valleys.
Exactly. And it's the same with these cat models. We've got to look at the spread, the ups and downs, not just the average. Focusing on just the average is like looking at a weather forecast that says sunshine, but not noticing there's also like a high chance of thunderstorms. You'd pack differently if you knew that was coming, right?
You know me too well.
Yep.
I'd be the one caught in the downpour without an umbrella. So what's the equivalent of checking for thunderstorms when we're talking about these models?
Well, that brings us to another important point the paper brings up, confidence intervals that might be, and I'm quoting here, lying by omission.
Ooh, that sounds shady. Okay, give me an example. How can a confidence interval lie?
Okay, so picture this. You've got this weather app, right? And it's 90% accurate overall. Sounds pretty good, yeah. But what if it always predicts sunshine, even on days when it's actually pouring rain? That missing 10% suddenly feels a whole lot more important. It's not just about being right on average, it's about being reliable in specific situations.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's not enough to just look at the overall accuracy. We need to dig into the detail. But how do we do that? Should we be like grilling every weather app developer out there?
Well, a little healthy skepticism never hurts. But what these authors are proposing is actually pretty clever. They introduce these two things, the squared error for coverage, or SEC, and the absolute error for coverage, AEC.
Those sound a tad intimidating.
Hey,
What's it just for those of us who aren't, statistics whizzes?
think of them like those friends who call you out when you're exaggerating a story. They're basically measuring how much the actual coverage, how often the model's prediction is right, deviates from what we'd expect. It's like telling the weather app, nice try, buddy, but I'm bringing my umbrella, just in case.
I am loving these analogies. Okay, so we're holding these models accountable, making sure they're not overselling their abilities. But now you're going to tell me there's a chance that getting a perfect score on these things might actually be a bad thing. That sounds kind of counterintuitive.
It might sound strange, but that's exactly what we're diving into next. Sometimes in the world of statistics, acing the test isn't all it's cracked up to be. All right, so buckle up. We're about to enter the twilight zone of statistics, where acing the test might actually set off alarm bells. Imagine for a second, you've got this model, right? And it's consistently nailing 100% coverage, meaning it's always, every single time, predicting an interval that captures the actual treatment effect.
Okay, on the surface, that sounds incredible. Like, isn't that what we're aiming for? Perfect predictions every time.
You'd think so, right? But here's the thing. Sometimes this perfect score can actually be a red flag. It might be hiding some underlying issues with the model. Think of it like that student who aces a multiple choice test purely by guessing. Sure, they got lucky and got all the answers right, but do they actually understand the material?
Ah. So it's like they're gaming the system, not really showing true knowledge. They might get away with it once or twice, but eventually their luck's gonna run out.
Exactly. And that's where things get tricky with these K-pop models. If we just look at that overall coverage number, we might get a false sense of security thinking it's incredibly accurate when in reality it's just making really, really broad predictions that happen to encompass the true value. Not very useful if you're trying to make a precise decision.
So it's like saying, I predict the temperature tomorrow will be somewhere between 0 and 100 degrees. Technically, you're not wrong, but it's not exactly helping me decide if I need a coat or not.
Exactly. And that's why this paper is stressing the importance of, actually looking at the data visually. Specifically, using tools like empirical histograms, which are basically visual representations of the data that can help us spot those too good to be true situations.
So, like peeking behind the curtain, not just taking the final performance at face value, we've got to understand the how and the why behind those perfect scores.
100%. It's about recognizing that these statistical measures, while powerful, don't always tell the whole story. We have to combine them with, some good old-fashioned critical thinking.
Okay, I'm picking up what you're putting down. So we've talked about these 4 big potential issues researchers can run into when they're evaluating those models that predict treatment effects, getting caught up in averages, glossing over variability, being fooled by misleading confidence intervals, and now being suspicious of those perfect scores. But let's take a step back for a second. Why should someone who's not knee-deep in data every day, why should they care about any of this?
That's the million-dollar question, right? It's easy to think this is all just, abstract statistical stuff, but it actually has huge consequences in the real world. I mean, think about it. Let's say there's a new drug in development for a serious illness.
I can already see the headlines now. Miracle drug offers new hope in fight against.
Right. But let's say those researchers who are evaluating how well that drug actually works, what if they fall into one or more of these statistical traps? They're so focused on the average effectiveness that they don't stop to think, hold on, does this drug work differently for different groups of people? Maybe it's not effective for everyone. Or what if they're relying on confidence intervals that are overly optimistic and masking potential side effects?
Okay, so now we've got this drug that, at first glance, looks like a miracle cure. But maybe it doesn't work for everyone. Or, even worse, there are hidden risks. That is a scary thought.
It is. And that's exactly why this push for more rigorous evaluation, like this paper is advocating for, is so crucial. It's about protecting people, making sure the treatments we're putting so much hope in are actually safe and effective.
Okay, that's healthcare. But what about other fields? Does this apply in other areas?
Oh, absolutely. These statistical pitfalls, they can trip us up everywhere. Imagine using these models to, say, evaluate the effectiveness of different social programs. If we're not really, really careful about how we choose and assess these models, we could end up pouring resources into initiatives that sound great in theory, but don't actually pan out the way we hoped.
Right, we could end up wasting taxpayer dollars, or, even worse, implementing policies that have unintended negative consequences because we weren't asking the right questions about the data.
Exactly. And what about personalized medicine? That whole field is built on being able to tailor treatments to our unique needs and characteristics, right? Well, the accuracy and reliability of those KT models we've been talking about, that's the foundation for all of it.
So if we're not evaluating those models with the utmost care, the whole idea of personalized medicine could just fall apart.
It's a real concern. We're talking about making huge decisions about people's lives, about their well-being, based on these models. We have to be as sure as we can be that they're up to the task.
That is a powerful statement. It really highlights that this isn't just about abstract statistics, it's about real people. It's about trust in the scientific process, trust in the information we're being given, and trust in the decisions that are being made based on that information. But let's bring it down to a personal level for a moment. How can we, as individuals who might not be statisticians or researchers, become more savvy consumers of information, especially when we're constantly being bombarded with claims of scientifically proven results? What can we do to avoid falling into these statistical traps ourselves?
You know, that's such an important question. And the good news is you don't need to be a statistics whiz to start thinking more critically. It starts with, having a healthy amount of skepticism, especially when you encounter these big, bold claims.
So, channel our inner skeptic. I like it. What else?
The next time you see a headline that's like, new study shows X cures Y, don't just take it at face value. Dig a little deeper. Find the original research. Don't just rely on the summaries or, those attention-grabbing social media posts. Ask yourself, who did this research? Was it a reputable institution or could they have some kind of agenda? How big was the study? Did they only look at a handful of people or was it a large and diverse group? And maybe most importantly, were there other possible explanations for the results that they didn't consider?
Yeah, it's like don't just take their word for it. Put on your detective hat and look for the other angles.
Exactly. It's about being, wisely skeptical, not cynical, but thinking critically. And that goes for, well, pretty much everything, not just these research studies.
So this whole deep dive has really been about so much more than just like the nitty-gritty of statistics. It's about how we think, how we approach, well, knowledge itself, questioning assumptions, being open to having our minds changed.
I love that. It's about really engaging with information, not just passively taking it in, and realizing that, even those proven results, they still deserve a closer look.
Which makes me wonder, are there other areas of life where we can all use a little dose of that critical thinking?
Oh, absolutely. Think about all those financial decisions we make. We're constantly hit with investment advice, market predictions, promises of guaranteed returns. But as we've seen with these statistical models, things are rarely as clear-cut as they seem.
So just because the numbers look good on paper doesn't mean it's a guaranteed home run.
Exactly. We need to understand the whole picture. What assumptions are they making? What are the potential downsides they're not talking about? And it's not just about money. This applies to how we think about politics, social issues, even our own personal relationships. I mean, think about it. How often do we jump to conclusions based on incomplete information or let our emotions get in the way of sound judgment?
More often than I'd like to admit. It's easy to get caught up in the heat of the moment or just see what we want to see.
We're all human. It's a constant learning process, but the more aware we are of these potential pitfalls, the better decisions we can make in all areas of our lives.
That's a great point. It's like the more we know about how our brains work, how easy it is to be misled, the better equipped we are to spot those traps and make more objective decisions.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that we all have biases, and that's okay, but we don't have to be controlled by them.
This has been incredibly insightful. So to wrap things up, I think the big takeaway here is this knowledge is power, but it's how we approach that knowledge, how critically we examine it, that truly makes all the difference.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's about being curious, asking those tough questions, and being brave enough to challenge our own assumptions.
And on that note, we'll leave our listeners with this. What areas of your life could benefit from a little more scrutiny? What assumptions are you holding on to? What truths have you accepted without really digging deeper? Time to put on those thinking caps and approach the world with a little more curiosity and a critical eye. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time.